Hi there, I'd like to introduce you to Reverend Tom Berlin. He's the lead pastor at Floris United Methodist Church in Herndon, Virginia. And we're going to talk about a kind of rough subject, how to approach life's end. Tom, I started thinking about this, I saw that there were going to be people talking about ALS. But of course, lots of people are facing imminent life's end. Mm-hmm. People with cancer, people with other illnesses, not only ALS folks. So having said that, I see two groups of people that are really concerned about approaching life's end. Old people such as myself, who are in their late 70s, who should have been talking and thinking about this for some time. But there are also young people in their 20s, 30s, 40s with young families who can suddenly face an imminent life's end situation, either through disease or accident or whatever. How do you see it? Do you see two groups, and what difference should they be making in their thoughts and discussions?
So, dying is a problem we all have.
Yes.
But to your observation, for some of us, it's more imminent than others. That said, you never know when you or someone you love is going to die.
Correct.
So tomorrow afternoon, I will lead a funeral service for a man who discovered 4 weeks ago that he had cancer.
Whoa.
So 4 weeks ago, he heard a diagnosis, and he was not aware of how rapidly that was going to occur to lead to the point of death. So I don't say that to frighten anyone or to say that that's going to happen to you if you're watching. But in my profession, death is a part of what happens, and so I'm in that space. But I also recognize that death is one of the great existential fears. It's the deepest anxiety most humans have.
Yeah, and we plan for weddings and we plan for birthdays, but do we often sit down and plan for death?
And so when I was in my 20s, my wife and I, we had our first child, and we did the responsible thing. We went and had a will drawn up, just in case. We want everything clear. The lawyer called, said the will's ready. We saw a copy of the will. We agreed it was ready. The lawyer said, all you have to do is come in and sign it. Please make a phone call and schedule to sign it. 2 months later, I called, and the woman who answered the phone, I apologize, I should have done this, why, I'm just so sorry. And she said, Tom, don't worry about it. And I said, why not? She said, everybody does that. She said, nobody wants to sign a will. Well, if you pull back and look at that account, you have to ask yourself, if that's true, why? And the answer is, none of us wants to think about our death.
Yeah.
So no one has a gift when they get a really bad diagnosis. I would argue that we would never be able to frame ALS as a gift. However, knowing that your life will end in a limited amount of time requires you to prepare for it.
Yep.
And I think that that becomes the level at which you're willing to do that preparation is the gift you give your family. It's the gift you give your spouse, your children, and if you don't, I lost an aunt this past year who had no spouse and no children. But she made a lot of preparations because she didn't want other people to have to do the work. But I also think that in doing the work of preparing and thinking about my own death, I'm giving myself a gift. Mm-hmm. Because the more comfortable I am with death, my experience as a pastor is, the more confident I'll be about my life. People who think about their death think about their life and what they invest in with their time and their treasure and their talent. So I think what you've raised is a really important question, and I love the fact that you're thinking about it beyond those who are dealing with ALS. Mm-hmm. I think it's critical for all of us.
Do you think that it's a different approach for those of faith and those without faith?
I can't speak for people without faith. I can say that I would encourage people of faith. I'm in a Christian tradition. I'm a pastor of a United Methodist Church. So within the tradition that I serve, we have a strong sense of assurance about the resurrection. Not all faith traditions believe that, but the one I'm in does. And so I encourage people to have a certain sense of confidence But, you know, I've got friends that are Jewish. I've got friends that are not even believers.
Well, that was going to be my next
Yeah,
question. What
no,
about people of other faiths?
I've got friends who are Muslim, friends who are not believers. I think all of us want to hold on to the hope that there's something more than what we have right now. And so I think that if that's true, if that's a hope we can hold on to, then that gives us a desire to finish well here, you know, and to finish in ways that are loving and close chapters of our life while we have the opportunity. We all have had friends and family members. We can probably anybody who's watching this video can think of somebody that they've lost in a car accident, in a heart attack, in some moment where you didn't have a chance to do anything.
Yeah.
I think that people who die well think about their death ahead of time. They make preparations. And I think the preparation has a way of dispelling the fear that we carry internally about death itself.
Now, there are obvious preparations of a mechanical sort, like wills and trusts and IRAs and all that sort of thing. What about the preparation mentally for one's own death? I mean, do you see any issues there, or how does it approach that?
I encourage people to start with their relationships. So everything let's start with what you said. The foundational work. So think about Maslow's hierarchy.
Yep.
Okay? That first level of that pyramid should be about, if I die, who will administer my estate? What will I leave assets to? Who will I leave assets to? Who will manage all that? What do I need to make crystal clear to my beneficiaries so that they don't end up arguing about it later because I didn't do a good job with my will? So do I have a valid will that's a valid instrument? Have I thought about who's going to do I have an advanced medical directive in such a way that I entrust someone with the ability to answer the doctor's questions if I'm not able to? Have I sat down and spoken to that person about what I think about life support, what I think about end-of-life decisions, to give them the freedom that if they choose not to use medical assistance at a certain moment, they're not killing Dad. You know, they're doing exactly what Dad asked them to do, and I take that burden off of their shoulders because I'm anticipating we can all anticipate the types of things that could happen. So that's a series of conversations with professionals, conversations with loved ones that are intricately involved in that. So it's not a wide conversation, it's a narrow one. So let's assume that all that gets done, the legal work, and it could also be, I went to the funeral home. I knew ahead of time I wanted a casket and I wanted to be buried, or conversely, I wanted to be cremated and be interred but I'm leaving directions.
Yeah. We've already prepaid our cremation. You know.
Exactly. So think about what a relief that is. Everybody knows, I've been with families, Roger, who didn't know what their loved one thought about medical assistance while they were dying. I've been with loved ones who didn't know cremation or casket. I don't know, you know? So just the conversation, to have any of those conversations requires me to get over a hurdle of my anxiety to begin that process. But notice, see, as I do that, if I do it in this area, I'm better at it in this area. If I do it in this area, I'm better at it here. Eventually, higher up on that hierarchy, we might think about our relationships. I think one of the really healthy things people do that are thinking about the fact that their life is not, this physical life is not eternal. There is an eternal life in a Christian tradition. And my Christian faith tells me that there is an eternal life. But it's not going to look like this. No. And frankly, thank God. Right? There will be a time, I'm very grateful for my body, but there will be a time when it'll be more of a trap than an aid. So if we believe that we have a limited time in this existence, what do we want to do in that time with our relationships? Many of us carry unresolved issues. You know, we may have somebody in our life who we want to say, I'm really proud of you, but we've never said it.
Yeah.
There may be a wife or a husband that we want to say, I'm amazed at the way you've loved me over this period of time.
Yeah.
And I need to say that. So I encourage people to say things and write things. And I would argue that if you start thinking about this, you'll start doing it without death being a precursor,
Yep.
right? You'll just start living. Again, people who think about dying tend to do better at living. Because if I think, so I have a brother who had a heart incident this summer. And, thankfully he's here, but he has diminished heart capacity. I mean, you can measure it. And the doctors told him that. Lo and behold, he's taking every Friday off now, and he and his wife are going to go do things. And he's semi-retired, so he can do that. Well, what a wonderful way to live.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So by thinking about, my goodness, if I keep on this schedule, I may die, he's improving his living. So I would think about relationships. I would think about, what are the loose ends I need to tie up relationally? Who are the people I want to affirm? What are the conflicts I want to resolve? Do I have the power to do that? Some of the conflicts we have in life we don't have the ability to fix. Some we might. But we can at least do some initial work on thinking about forgiveness, thinking about reconciliation. We may not sit down and have a face-to-face. We may send a letter, and say, here's some things I'm thinking about, but it should be generous. It's not a, here's why you're wrong letter. It's a, here's what I'm longing for kind of letter. So I would think about those relationships. I would think very carefully about how I want to invest. If I know that I have 5 years to live, what do I want to do for those 5 years? And for most of us, what we want to do is think about the things where we feel that God uses our talents, where we really enjoy it. I think you all have done some traveling recently, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
It was a bucket list cruise from Venice down the Adriatic to Santorini, the Greek island, which I've always been fascinated by, because when I was a teenager, I read a book by a fellow out of Woods Hole, Oceanic Research, who had this theory that when it exploded, the island exploded 1400 BC, destroyed the Minoan civilization in the Eastern Mediterranean, that was the basis for the legends of Atlantis. And so I've always wanted to go and see it, and we were able to do that, and it was quite fabulous.
Yeah. So you started that by saying it was a bucket list trip.
Yeah.
Notice that you're taking your bucket list trip, right? And that's because you're facing the hard reality that you don't know how much longer that travel is available to you, but you also don't know how much longer your life is.
Yeah.
Now, I don't have your diagnosis, but if I was thinking about my death, I would have first developed some sense of things I want to do before that happens, but maybe I would start scheduling them, right? Mm-hmm. Most of us are living so busy in the present, and our life is so full of things that really, when we look back on them, we're not sure they were that important to us. Yeah. I think that thinking about one's death allows us to prioritize, first identify what they want to do, prioritize what they want to do, and then actually plan to do it. Yeah. And I'm just so grateful that you and your wife were able to do that. Yeah. What a gift.
We too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I know you, so I know that you probably would have done that whether you had this diagnosis or not.
Well, one day.
And there it is.
Yeah.
There it is. So I feel very privileged that there are people who've entrusted. People will sometimes say things to a pastor that they haven't said before. And I can tell you that in the hundreds of hours I've spent with people talking about their lives, one day is a phrase that is used a lot.
Yeah.
And so it's not that we all need to rush out and climb Mount Everest, That's not what I'm proposing. But what I am saying is, if we can just do a thought experiment that's real. So we have this seminar here at the church that we do on occasion. We do it about once a year. It's called Yes, You Are Going to Die. And someone asked me one time, why did you call it Yes, You're Going to Die? And the answer is, as a pastor, I have a hard time convincing people that they're going to die. I mean, they know it,
yeah,
but they don't know it.
Yeah.
And I have found that if we can help people think through the mechanics of the things we have to do before we die, the first thing is we can prevent a lot of negative. I have sat in hospital waiting rooms, as I said earlier, where no one knows anything.
Yep.
No one knows the first thing about what mom wanted, what dad wanted, what my brother wanted. I've been there in situations where people don't have even a starting point. I mean, first you got the shock of someone dying.
Yeah.
But what do you do? What do we do next? Well, that's not something most of us are thinking about. So we can assist that hard moment. Much less if, as I said earlier, if you've got medical intervention questions that have to be answered by family members.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's all important.
That seminar, as you put it, of you're going to die, is what got, several years ago, got Carol and I thinking about those issues and getting a trust set up and all that sort of thing. So I found it a very valuable evening.
And as you remember, what we do is we bring in a funeral home director, a pastor, a doctor, and an attorney.
Yep.
Those 4 professionals. And each of them talks for about, and the question that we put to them is, what do we need to know before we die from your point of view? And we just walk through, and by the time that people leave on the second night, for free, they have been able to fill out some basic documents that will advise. But more importantly, what we're trying to do is to model the conversation that we were encouraging them to have with their relatives or whoever is going to be administering this time in their life.
Yeah. Big question. I think it's Maryland and DC have assisted suicide provisions in the laws now. And I know that there are folks, not only with ALS, but other debilitating diseases, who are now going to Switzerland, where they have a fairly, I won't say lax, but generous way of doing that. What is your view about, as a man of cloth, so to speak, of rational suicide?
So it's interesting because just as we have the capacity to extend life in a humane fashion, in a way that people say, you know, I would like to have my life extended with this technology, we also now have the technological ability to end life in a way that a person could choose, and they would not see it as punitive.
Yeah.
And so it creates a very intense ethical dilemma that different people are resolving different ways. Now, I'm a pastor of United Methodist Church, so I stand in a certain religious tradition and a certain context. So I'm going to tell you what I think about that, but I'm not judging what other people are doing. I don't have any protest signs here, Roger. I'm just saying this is where I'm at, and this is where I think my tradition is. Christians tend to have a strong ethic that we don't know how much time we have, but that time is in God's hands. And so we believe that ending life is not a choice that we should take. It's not an ethical choice. Now, the reason that's important is another question I'm sometimes asked every so often by a younger person who's deeply depressed, or a person with mental health problems, or a person with addiction issues is, I'd like to end my life because it can't be any worse than this. Why shouldn't I? The answer I give to those 3 groups of people has to be the same as the one I give someone with ALS. Because I can't say it's okay for you to end your life, because people with severe mental health issues, their experience of life is that there is no light at the end of the tunnel. They may not be grasping for their breath, which is what many end-stage diseases can produce, but they are not easily convinced that their life is worth living, and they are easily convinced that their life is worth taking. So as you can imagine, someone in my profession is not going to be on the side of, you know what, I'm really comfortable with the choice you make. However, having said that, I'm aware of all the choices people can now make, especially if they go to somewhere like Switzerland. And I think people, I can't imagine any more intimate choice than that, right?
Mm.
So I'm not promotional for it. I'm not even neutral. It is something I hope I would not choose for myself. But I also sit in hospital rooms when people are dying. So probably more than most people, I've had experiences of watching death happen. And I'm not a funeral home director, I'm not a doctor, but pastors are in those spaces. So we have a general, pretty good understanding of that. So I certainly understand why it's of interest with a disease like ALS. But in general, the answer that you're asking me is, I think life is in God's hands. I think we live our lives. Finally, I think life includes suffering.
Oh, yeah.
We're in a culture today that believes that suffering should be avoided at all costs. I don't think any of us want to run into suffering on purpose. I see some people live their lives in a way that produces suffering. I don't think that's wise. My grandmother had multiple sclerosis. That was a very slow death, and as a child, I remember going and visiting at her bedside and watching her slip away with that disease because fewer of her muscles could respond.
Mm-hmm.
It's similar in that way to ALS.
Yeah.
That's not a death I would want for myself nor anyone that I love. But it is present. And I know we're all going to die. My grandmother had great hope in eternal life. She didn't have options, she didn't have this ethical dilemma,
Mm-hmm.
right? But what she modeled for me is that in the hardship of suffering, there are lessons that are discovered in relationships that are formed that are not found anywhere else. There's a sacredness in caring for the suffering and in being the suffering. But it is a space most of us don't want because we have been taught to be fiercely independent, to not want people to wipe our mouths or help us with our breathing. And we're talking about some of the most basic human functions. When my grandmother's at the end of her life, the most basic of her functions she could not handle for herself. And there was an indignity to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that as we look around, as we sort of walk around the situation that you've set up and look at it from different angles, we have to also recognize the indignity of it and the hardship of it. And I believe, as from a Christian perspective, God will be found in every one of those spaces in a different way. But what God tends not to do is wave a magic wand and make everything go away.
See, my biggest concern about the end of life situation is not so much me dying. I just don't want to be lying in bed only able to move my eyelids, for instance. And if it gets to that stage, the daily cost of, because my dear lady wife is not a spring chicken either, although she might look like it. So there is a huge cost involved. And with limited resources, surely there are better ways of spending that money in the future for her care than keeping my eyelids moving.
Yeah. So I think that's, I think there is a lot of truth in what you're saying about the cost. And it's especially true in a society where healthcare is a major cost for individuals and families, and where there's very little safety net for that. So if you go to Switzerland, you're in a country where there's a bigger safety net.
Yeah.
In the United States, we simply don't have that to that same degree. And so, I think you're putting out a fair concern.
Yeah. Do you have anything you want to add before we kind of press the button to stop?
No, I think that you're modeling a really good behavior. See, by making this video, what Roger's doing is he's demonstrating what people do who live well because they're thinking well about their death. Because he's put together, several of these videos now. And rather than thinking about ALS in a uniquely internal way, which who would fault you for that? And I've known Roger for a while, so this is classic Roger Frost. What he's done is he's turned this around and said, I wonder how I could help other people with ALS, given that I have ALS, and given that I'm becoming an ALS expert. And so I'm saying that to the people who might be watching this because that's the behavior that any human being, when we undertake that behavior, we die well. And you know, Roger, it is not, I can't imagine what it's like to be you. I can't imagine what it's like to have ALS and to know, but it's also difficult. You know, you've got friends, you've got your wife, you've got family that's around you. And, you know, we notice when you don't have the same arm mobility than you used to. But what is so amazing in the midst of that is the fierce spirit that is thinking not about, oh, look at what I've lost. You'll say that. I mean, and I really appreciate your honesty. Like, that's refreshing. You're not hiding it. You're not. But as you say that, what you do is say, essentially with the video and other things that you do, you know what, I bet we can do something for other people and help them think about that. And the community that you create in that is a fantastic example of living well.
Well, thank you.
And to not let ALS take that from you, I think says a lot about who you are. So thank you for that.
And thank you for being with us.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you. Thank you so much for watching.